Step softly into the past. Here, history isn't a list of dates and battles. It's a quiet lantern glow, guiding you through forgotten alleys of time. From medieval villages whispering their gossip in bathhouses, to Byzantine monks measuring rain, to ancient Egyptians steeping herbs stronger than wine, every tale is told gently, slowly, and with care. This channel is for dreamers, night owls, insomniacs, and wanderers of history alike. Whether you seek comfort before sleep, a soft-spoken companion on a long evening, or simply the joy of discovering curious corners of the human story, you'll find it here. Each episode is a long-form journey, immersive storytelling, vivid yet soothing, where we wander through markets, palaces, cloisters, and forgotten forests. No loud narrations, no frantic cuts, only the gentle rhythm of history, told like a bedtime story meant to last centuries. So, tuck yourself in, rest your thoughts, and let the past carry you away. Sparkles. Bell, subscribe and join me in unraveling the quiet wonders of history, one sleepy story at a time. The lanterns had only just been lit when the first sound of evening bells drifted across the valley. It was a slow, bronze hum, the kind of tone that didn't announce itself so much as lean into the ear, like a whisper reluctant to break the peace. Beyond the fields, where the last traces of sunlight were folded into strips of orange and pale blue, a village stirred itself into the business of night. The houses leaned close together, their wooden beams dark with age, their thatched roofs bearing the smell of smoke from centuries of hearths. Doors opened and closed softly. Chickens were coaxed into their coops. From one corner of the street, a girl balanced a wicker basket of herbs against her hip, the green leaves spilling over like unruly hair. From another, a boy pulled at the sleeve of his mother, asking if the baker still had bread warm enough to steam when torn apart. It was not an extraordinary village by any account. Travelers might pass through and call it quiet, even forgettable. But those who lived here knew better. They knew the cobbles could speak if you pressed your ear low to them, that the river sometimes carried songs no man had sung, and that the old linden tree at the square had grown just slightly different each spring, as if someone invisible had been tending it with care. Tonight, however, there was a hum under the ordinary, a sense that the air had been folded differently. The gossip in the tavern seemed brighter, the chatter outside the bathhouse carried more weight, and the shadows themselves looked ready to lean in, as though waiting for the right story to begin. And in the corner of that village, in a house small enough that smoke curled from its chimney like a thread instead of a plume, an old woman set down her cup, listened to the bells, and whispered, "It has begun again." The old woman's name was Marta, though the villagers, out of habit, called her grandmother even if they shared no blood. She had lived in the crooked house for longer than most could remember. Children swore that she had been old when their grandparents were young, and perhaps they were not entirely wrong. Her hair was silver, her hands a map of wrinkles, yet her eyes held the steady gleam of river stones, unyielding, watching, and never surprised. On nights like these, when the bells sounded thicker than they should and the air felt swollen with memory, Marta brewed her tea from roots instead of leaves. She claimed it kept the dreams out where they belong. If you asked what she meant by that, she would only laugh, a dry, papery sound, and send you on your way with a handful of dried lavender for your pillow. This evening she did not laugh. She reached into her cupboard, fingers brushing jars whose contents rattled like bones or glimmered faintly as though light had been trapped within. Selecting one, she held it to the lamplight, a small vessel of cloudy glass, filled with something dark and shifting, like smoke trapped in honey. She had not touched it in years. Outside, the village hummed louder. A group of men leaving the tavern spoke of odd lights seen near the riverbank. A washerwoman told her neighbor that her copper basin had tipped over of its own accord. Even the dogs seemed restless, pacing the edges of the square, growling at nothing that could be seen. Marta's door creaked open before she had time to decide what to do with the jar. Standing there was a boy no older than 12, his cheeks flushed with running, his eyes wide. "Grandmother," he said, his breath clouding in the cool air. "The linden tree, it's moving." Marta closed her hand around the glass vessel, sighed as though she had been expecting precisely this, and whispered, "Then we have less time than I thought." The boy's name was Joran, though few remembered to call him that. To most he was simply the miller's lad, quick-footed and quicker-tongued, a boy with a knack for finding trouble where no one else dared look. His father often cuffed him for it, but tonight his fear was real, and even Marta could hear it threading through his voice. "The branches," Joran stammered, clutching at her sleeve. "They bent without wind. They reached." Marta lifted her shawl, pulled it close around her shoulders, and motioned for the boy to follow. "If the linden has woken, then so too will what sleeps beneath it." Outside, the square glowed dimly from lanterns that swung in iron brackets, their light spilling over cobbles slick with the day's earlier rain. The linden tree stood at the center as it always had, vast and gnarled, its roots like knuckled fists pressing up from the earth. To the untrained eye, it was simply a tree, old, magnificent, but still. Yet tonight its silhouette shifted against the lantern glow, branches curling slightly inward, like fingers folding toward a palm. A handful of villagers had already gathered. They kept their distance, whispering behind cupped hands, their faces pale. Joran's father was there, his broad chest heaving with uneasy breath, his miller's apron still powdered white with flour. Beside him stood the baker, the blacksmith, even the priest, each with the same wary crease between their brows. When Marta stepped into the circle, the murmuring died. She had not come to the square in months, not since winter. The sight of her, bent but resolute, made the villagers stand straighter, though not one dared ask why she carried a glass vessel hidden within her shawl. The linden shuddered. A creak groaned through its trunk, deep and hollow, like the sound of a door opening where no door should be. Lanterns flickered. A child whimpered and was hushed. Marta fixed her eyes on the tree and spoke low, almost to herself. "It remembers." The roots began to shift. Slowly at first, like a sleeper turning under blankets, then with a sharper twist, sending pebbles scattering across the cobbles. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The priest clutched his cross tighter. Children hid behind skirts. Even the bravest among them could not keep their feet from edging back. But Marta did not move. She stepped closer, her cane tapping once, twice, against the stones. The lantern light caught her face, carving shadows deep into the creases of her skin. She looked, for a moment, as old as the tree itself. "Do not run," she said without turning. "If you flee, it will follow." The miller's lad tugged at her sleeve again. "What will, grandmother?" She did not answer. Instead, she lowered herself with surprising steadiness, and laid her palm against the bark. The tree was warm, not the gentle warmth of sun-soaked wood, but something pulsing, alive, as though blood moved beneath. The villagers held their breath. The priest muttered a prayer. And then, with a sound like splitting earth, a crack ran along the trunk. From within spilled not sap but a faint, silver light, threads of it weaving through the air like smoke. The crowd stepped back, murmuring, terrified yet unable to turn away. Joran's voice trembled. "It's bleeding." "No," Marta whispered, fingers still pressed firm against the bark. "It's remembering." Her hands slipped into her shawl. The glass vessel clinked softly, the shadowed thing inside stirring as if it, too, had been awakened. She looked once at the crowd, at their fear, at their hunger for answers, and then back at the wound in the tree. "If the linden has opened," she said, raising her voice so all could hear, "then something long buried is ready to return. And it will not ask permission." The silver light seeped from the wound like mist from a cauldron. It coiled low to the ground, weaving between boots and skirts, until the cobblestones themselves gleamed faintly as if polished by moonlight. The villagers pressed back against the walls of the square, their eyes wide, but no one dared leave. Curiosity, stronger than fear, held them fast. The priest, beads of sweat forming along his brow, lifted his cross higher. "This is blasphemy," he muttered, though his voice shook. "The devil cloaked as light." Marta's gaze snapped to him, sharp as a hawk's. "You call devil what you do not understand. Hush your tongue before it stirs further." The tree groaned again. This time the sound rolled like thunder, echoing up the narrow lanes. A fissure widened along the trunk, and something shifted inside, something darker than the light, the shadow of a form pressing to emerge. Joran clutched Marta's shawl tighter. "Grandmother, what's in there?" Her lips moved before she could stop them, an answer half whispered to herself. "Not what? Who?" The crowd stirred uneasily, each catching fragments of her words. Eyes darted between the old woman, the tree, and the glowing crack that yawned wider with every heartbeat. And then it came, a single voice, soft and broken, drifting out from the hollow within the linden. "Is it time?" The villagers recoiled, some crying out, others covering their mouths in horror. The baker dropped his loaf basket, the rolls scattering across the stones like dice. But Marta bowed her head. Her eyes closed as though in prayer, though no priest had taught the words she mouthed. When she looked up again, her voice was steady. "Yes," she said into the shimmering air. "It is time." The crack split fully open, and the light poured forth, brighter now, yet still gentle, like dawn breaking over a long-forgotten horizon. From the heart of the linden, a figure stepped forward. At first, it was only a suggestion, a silhouette woven of light and shadow, neither fully flesh nor fully spirit. Its limbs seemed carved from smoke, its hair a flowing stream of silver white. The face, though blurred, bore a softness that unsettled the crowd even more than if it had been monstrous. The villagers gasped as one. A woman crossed herself. The miller muttered a curse. The dogs that had prowled the edges of the square dropped low, whining, tails pressed between their legs. The figure's bare feet touched the stones with no sound. It looked slowly around the square, eyes like lanterns, though they flickered as if still remembering how to burn. Joran's hand dug into Marta's arm. "It's a ghost." "No," Marta said, her gaze unflinching. "A memory. Older than ghosts." The figure tilted its head, and when it spoke again, its voice carried both in the air and inside the skulls of those gathered. It was not loud, not cruel, merely inevitable. "You kept the root." Marta's lips pressed in. She reached into her shawl, fingers tightening around the glass vessel. "I kept it because I was told to. And now you would claim it." The figure took a step closer, its shape trembling like water struck by stone. "Without it, I am not whole. Without it, neither are you." A chill swept across the square, though no wind stirred. The villagers, caught between awe and dread, dared not move. All eyes fixed on the small, cloudy jar clutched in the old woman's hands. Joran whispered, "What's inside, grandmother?" For the first time, Marta looked afraid. Her voice, when it came, was soft but carried to every corner of the square. "Something I prayed would never wake." The jar trembled in Marta's hands. The dark substance inside writhed as if it had been waiting all these years for the crack in the linden to open. Tiny threads of light flickered within it, like veins of lightning trapped in tar. The figure extended a hand, its voice a low murmur that seemed to ripple through marrow. "Give it back!" The villagers recoiled, pressing against one another as though the crowd itself might provide safety. The priest raised his cross again, though his hands shook so violently that the metal clinked against its chain. "This is unholy!" he shouted, his voice breaking. "We must destroy it!" "Destroy it?" The figure turned, its blurred face shifting toward him. "You speak of destroying memory, of undoing what roots have guarded. Would you cut down the sun for shining? Would you bury the river to keep it from flowing?" The priest faltered, words shriveling in his throat. No one else dared answer. Marta's eyes, however, did not leave the being. She clutched the jar tighter, her knuckles white against the glass. "You speak fair, but I know what you are. The linden was bound to hold you. And I, fool that I was chosen to guard what you lacked." The figure's hand dropped slowly. Its gaze, if such a thing could be said of those luminous, shifting eyes, rested on her with something like sorrow. "You age, Marta. You crumble. Yet I have been waiting. Do you not tire of carrying me alone?" Her jaw tightened. The question pierced deeper than she cared to admit. For a flicker of a moment, her hand wavered, as if she might indeed offer the jar. But then Joran's small fingers clutched her sleeve again, anchoring her. His wide eyes, frightened yet steadfast, pulled her back. "No," she said firmly. "The day you are made whole again is the day the village falls." The figure's light flared, casting long, twisting shadows across the square. "Then, grandmother," it said, voice heavy as stone, "the village will fall tonight." The air thickened, as though the very night itself were being pulled inward. Lantern flames guttered, shrinking to nervous pinpricks, while the silver glow from the linden swelled brighter, swallowing every corner of the square. The villagers panicked. Some stumbled backward into alleys, others fell to their knees, muttering prayers. Mothers clutched their children close. Yet no one truly left. Fear rooted them in place just as surely as the linden's roots anchored the square. The figure raised its arms, and the cobbles beneath their feet shivered. Cracks spider-webbed outward, dust lifting into the air like breath from an old tomb. A low, resonant hum filled the space, so deep it seemed to come from inside the chest of every living soul. Joran cried out and covered his ears, but Marta held her ground, her shawl snapping in the strange current. She lifted the jar high, the dark substance inside writhing faster, pressing against the glass as though eager to answer the call of the light-born figure. "Stay," Marta commanded, her voice surprisingly strong. "You will not leave this vessel." The figure's eyes flared, molten and sorrowful. "You cannot hold me, not anymore. The tree weakens. The binding thins. You are old, Marta, your bones creak, your heart stumbles. Why carry this burden into your grave?" Marta spat at the ground, though her lips trembled. "Because if I falter, all of them," she motioned sharply to the trembling villagers, "will suffer what you once brought. I remember the stories." The figure's glow dimmed for a heartbeat, and its shape seemed to shiver. "Stories," it whispered, bitter and soft. "Yes, they always tell the stories. And yet not one of them remembers my name." The crack in the linden groaned wider, roots tearing up the cobbles. From deep within the hollow came a rush of wind carrying faint, haunting notes, like fragments of a song nearly forgotten. The villagers pressed closer to one another, eyes wide with terror. Joran, clinging to Marta's arm, looked up at her desperately. "What did it do, grandmother? What's in the jar?" Marta closed her eyes. For a moment she seemed older than the stones themselves. When she opened them again, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "It is the heart of what once ruled this valley." A hush fell over the square at Marta's words, heavy and absolute, as though even the night itself strained to listen. The villagers stared, unblinking, their fear laced now with something else, curiosity, dangerous and raw. The figure's glow flickered, then steadied, its shape tightening into sharper form. Its voice softened, mournful and accusing all at once. "At last she speaks of me. A heart torn from its chest, bound in glass, hidden beneath years of dust and lies. Tell them, Marta. Tell them who I am. Marta's jaw clenched. Her fingers dug into the vessel until it bit her palm. She looked not at the villagers but at the earth itself, as though ashamed to let her eyes meet theirs. You were once called a guardian, she said slowly. Not a god, not a demon, something between. Bound to the linden when the first stones of this village were laid. You watched. You gave. And then... Her breath hitched. The jar throbbed in her hand, pulsing with light and shadow. And then you demanded more. The villagers stirred uneasily. Some muttered, others shook their heads. Guardian? Demanded? The words cut jagged holes in their ignorance, and into those holes poured dread. The figure's eyes burned brighter. I asked only what was promised. Their voices, their reverence, their offerings at the root. I asked for remembrance. But they forgot. They feasted, they sang, they bore children beneath my branches, and then they turned away. Left me to rot into silence. Its voice trembled now, no longer smooth, but ragged with grief. Do you know what it is to be abandoned by those you kept safe? The priest, gathering shaky courage, shouted back. If you were abandoned, it was for reason. No holy guardian demands blood. The figure whirled, and for the first time its shape hardened, shoulders, hands, a face almost clear. Anger flared in its lantern eyes. Not blood! Never blood! Only memory. Only the breath of their songs, the weight of their steps around my roots. I fed on what they gave freely, and still they called it theft. The silver glow wavered. Marta saw it, saw the fracture of sorrow beneath the rage, and raised the jar higher, as though reminding both spirit and villagers of the truth bound within. You were never content, she said, her voice steady again. That is why your heart was taken. To keep you from hollowing us all. The figure froze. Its light dimmed to a soft, trembling glow. My heart, it whispered. And still you clutch it, old woman, as though it were yours to keep. The square was silent, save for the creaking of the linden roots splitting stone. The jar grew heavier in Marta's hands. What once had been a vessel she could lift with ease now dragged at her arms, as if the heart inside recognized the nearness of its other half and strained to rejoin it. The dark substance pressed harder against the glass, tendrils of shadow writhing like restless serpents. The villagers murmured, their voices like the rustling of dry leaves. Some looked at Marta with pleading eyes, desperate for her to end this nightmare by surrendering the jar. Others glared with suspicion, their fear twisting into anger. Why had she kept such a thing hidden from them all these years? The figure raised one glowing hand. Give it back, it said, softer this time, almost a plea. I am no enemy. I only want to be whole. You cannot imagine what it is to live without a heart. Joran, still clutching Marta's shawl, whispered, Grandmother, maybe if you gave it, it would stop. Marta's chest tightened. She looked down at the boy, the only one in the crowd brave enough to touch her, to trust her even now, and felt the old war rise again inside her. Duty, heavy as stone. Compassion, sharp as grief. And behind it all, the echo of a promise made long ago, when her hair was not yet silver and her hands did not tremble. She turned her gaze back to the villagers. Do not be fooled. You hear kindness in its voice, but kindness is not the same as mercy. When the bindings break, it will not stop at being whole. It will demand all it once claimed, and more. The figure's form flickered, a storm passing through its light. Lies, it hissed, though sorrow thickened its tone. You speak as though I were hunger itself. I was the breath in your fields, the shield against plague and storm. Did you not thrive under my watch? And what thanks was I given? A prison. The priest, trembling but resolute, raised his cross high. Then back into the prison with you, he cried. Back into the tree, where you belong. At those words, the linden shuddered violently, branches lashing like whips, scattering lanterns and sending sparks raining across the square. Villagers screamed and ducked. The figure's glow flared bright enough to blind. Never again! It thundered. I will not return to silence! The ground split open at the roots of the linden, cobbles heaving upward. And the jar in Marta's hands began to crack. A thin fracture raced across the glass, jagged and sharp as lightning. Marta gasped, clutching the jar tighter, but the pressure within it only grew. The villagers cried out as they heard it too, the high, keening note of something imprisoned too long, straining for release. Grandmother! Joran shrieked, tugging at her sleeve. It's breaking! She fell to her knees, setting the vessel against the cobbles as though her frail arms could no longer bear the weight. The glow from within pulsed in time with the figure's trembling form. Each throb widened the crack until thin slivers of shadow seeped into the air like smoke. The figure stepped forward, its voice low and coaxing. Let it come! Do not fight what cannot be undone. You think me a terror, but I am your origin. You live because of me. Your fields grow because I once sang to them. Your children are strong because I fed the earth. Without me, this place is nothing but dust waiting to scatter. Some villagers faltered. The baker, his face pale and damp with sweat, whispered hoarsely, If it is true, if it can give back what we've lost, our harvests, the sick children, should we not? No! Marta snapped, her voice slicing through the night. You forget too quickly. You forget what it asked when the rains failed, what it demanded when fever swept the valley. Her eyes burned with memory. You remember the bounty, but not the price. It always asks more. The crowd shivered, whispers turning to argument. Some shouted for her to smash the jar and end this torment. Others urged her to hand it over, to restore the guardian and gamble for its favor. The square split like the cracked glass itself, torn between dread and desire. Joran, crouched beside Marta, looked up at her with eyes brimming with fear. What if they're right? What if keeping it locked away is worse? Marta's breath rattled in her chest. She wanted to tell him no, to reassure him. But the jar shuddered again, splintering deeper, and for the first time she feared she could not stop what was coming. The figure reached out one trembling hand. Its voice was no longer thunder, but weary supplication. Please! I want only to be whole again. The jar gave a sharp, ringing crack, one more breath, and it would burst. The sound came like the snapping of ice on a river. The jar shattered. Fragments of glass scattered across the cobbles, glittering in the lantern light before dissolving into nothing at all, as if even the shards could not bear to remain. From the ruin of the vessel rose a mass of shadow threaded with veins of silver light. It twisted upward, coiling like smoke yet pulsing like a living thing, every tendril straining toward the glowing figure by the linden. The villagers screamed and fell back. Some pressed themselves flat against the walls of the square. Others fled into alleys but stopped short of leaving altogether, as if bound by invisible threads to witness the end. Marta pushed Joran behind her, her old arms spread as though she could shield him from what came next. Her heart pounded like a drum against her ribs, yet she did not run. She had waited too long for this moment to turn her back now. The figure inhaled, and the shadow mass surged toward it, eager, hungry. With each inch it drew closer, its form sharpened, limbs clearer, hair spilling long and bright, the blurred face tightening into features of undeniable beauty and undeniable sorrow. Yes, the figure whispered. At last. But something was wrong. The shadow did not slip into the figure as water into water. It lashed around it instead, binding, choking, twisting. The silver veins flared too bright, too violent, and the air split with a shriek that was neither voice nor wind but the tearing sound of memory itself. The guardian staggered. Its radiant form convulsed, light and shadow warring across its body. For a heartbeat it looked whole, radiant, terrible, magnificent. Then the light cracked, and the sorrow twisted into rage. Marta's face went white. "No," she whispered. "The heart has changed." The linden groaned, its branches whipping wildly, scattering leaves that glowed like embers. Roots tore free from the earth, dragging cobbles with them. The square buckled as though the ground itself no longer wished to hold what was being reborn. The guardian's voice rang out, no longer mournful, no longer pleading, but filled with a hunger vast and raw. "I remember." The guardian's voice rolled through the square like thunder unbound. Every lantern blew out in an instant, plunging the crowd into a silver and shadow twilight. Only the glow of the linden and the searing veins of light across the guardian's form remained, painting the square in ghostly brilliance. Villagers fell to their knees, some crying prayers, others weeping openly. The priest dropped his cross and scrambled back, his faith broken under the weight of what stood before them. The guardian lifted its hands. The air thickened. The shadows stretched long and thin, slithering up the walls of houses, seeping into shutters and door frames. Wooden beams groaned as though centuries of rot had arrived all at once. Marta shoved Joran further behind her, her voice hoarse but commanding. "Stay low. Do not speak. Do not look it in the eyes." But Joran, trembling, whispered, "It's angry, because of us." The guardian's gaze swept over the crowd. Its features had sharpened now, high-boned, luminous, terrible in beauty, eyes like suns burning through storm. Its voice was no longer pleading but triumphant, ringing across the stones. "You planted your houses on my roots. You drank my waters, plucked fruit from my fields. You called yourselves lords of this valley, while I bled in silence. No longer." The linden shuddered, its branches splitting into jagged spears that lashed out, piercing roofs and scattering tiles. A scream tore from the blacksmith as his shoulder was caught, blood spattering the cobbles. Villagers surged into panic, some trying to flee down alleys, only to find roots bursting upward, barring escape. Marta raised her cane, though her hands shook. "Stop!" she cried. "You are not whole, you are poisoned. The heart was bound too long, steeped in fear and hatred. It is not what it was." The guardian froze, the veins of silver pulsing brighter. For a moment its face flickered, rage cracking to sorrow, then back again. "Not what it was," it echoed, almost mournful. "Yes. I am more now. I am everything you denied me." It spread its arms, and the ground heaved as though the earth itself bent to its will. The cobbles split wider. From the cracks seeped a dark mist that curled and slithered, reaching for the feet of the villagers. Joran clutched Marta's hand, his voice breaking. "Grandmother, we can't fight that. What do we do?" Marta's eyes burned, fierce despite the terror clawing her chest. "We do what we must. We remind it what it was meant to be." Marta tightened her grip on Joran's hand until he winced, but he did not pull away. Her other hand, the one that once held the shattered jar, reached for the ground. She pressed her palm flat to the cobbles, feeling the tremor of the earth, the roots thrashing beneath. The guardian loomed above them, every flicker of its form brighter, crueler. Villagers cowered against walls, their voices rising in pleas and prayers that tangled with the hiss of the dark mist spreading through the square. Marta's voice cut through the din, low, cracked, but steady. "Listen to me." The guardian's head turned, its molten eyes narrowing. Shadows writhed at its feet, eager to strike. "You were not born of rage," Marta said, her voice rising. "You were not meant to unmake what you once tended. Do you remember, guardian? Do you remember the first offerings? Not blood, not fear, bread and song, the laughter of children, the planting of seeds at your roots. The guardian flinched. For an instant, the branches of the linden stilled. Marta pressed harder to the earth. She began to hum. It was a trembling sound at first, faint as a reed in wind. But the note grew steadier, pulling from some memory deep in her bones. A song older than her voice, older than her name. Her grandmother had hummed it once, rocking her by the fire. A song, she was told, the village had always sung at planting. Joran's eyes widened. He knew the tune, half forgotten, yet familiar. His thin voice joined hers, uncertain but earnest. One by one, the villagers, desperate and afraid, began to echo it. First a murmur, then a wavering chorus, until the square trembled not with the guardian's fury but with human breath bound in song. The mist recoiled. The branches of the linden sagged. The guardian staggered as if struck, clutching its chest where the heart had sunk. "No," it whispered, its voice breaking. "Do not remind me. Do not." But Marta sang louder, her eyes closed, tears cutting lines through the dust on her cheeks. Her voice cracked but did not falter. "You are not hunger," she cried between notes. "You are memory. You are our keeping place. Remember what you were." The silver veins across the guardian's body blazed, not with fury this time but with unbearable grief. Its cry tore through the square, half scream, half sob, and the linden's branches bowed low, shuddering as though under great weight. The air trembled, waiting. The song rippled through the night like a thread of light, fragile yet unyielding. Marta's voice faltered, but Joran steadied her with his own. Children clung to their mother's skirts, humming as best they could, while the men who once cursed superstition now mouthed every note with trembling lips. The square, broken, bloodied, shadow-choked, was filled with something older than terror. The guardian swayed. Its great limbs, half formed of branches and silver flame, curled inward as if the sound pierced more deeply than any blade. The veins of light across its chest flared, flickering with uneven rhythm, like a heart caught between beating and breaking. "I remember." Its voice cracked, no longer thunder but rain on stone. "I remember the children laying wreaths in spring. I remember the old woman who poured the first milk at my roots. I remember." The mist shrieked, a sound separate from the guardian, as if some other will had taken residence in its form. It recoiled from the song, thrashing violently, twisting like a shadow trying to strangle the light. The villagers faltered, the melody wavering. Marta forced her cane against the ground, bracing herself upright though her knees buckled. "Do not stop! Do not let it drown us again!" Her words reignited the voices. Louder now, fuller, a chorus of desperation and hope. The square shook with it. Even the priest, who moments ago clutched nothing but fear, pressed a trembling hand to his chest and sang. The guardian clutched at its breast, its form splitting with veins of light. From its eyes streamed not fire but water, liquid silver dripping into the cracks below. "I was made to guard," it whispered. "I was made to hold, but the silence poisoned me." The mist rose higher, curling up the guardian's arms like a parasite, twisting its face into something monstrous again. Joran's hand tightened around Marta's. His voice, small but steady, rang out above all others. "You are still ours! You are not lost!" The guardian froze. The mist shrieked again, but the sound broke, scattered like smoke in wind. The figure's body arched back, light pouring from every fissure in its form, until the square was filled with radiance too bright to bear. Villagers shielded their faces, Marta dragged Joran to the ground, and the linden itself groaned as though on the edge of splintering. Then came silence. A silence vast, aching, and absolute. When the light dimmed, it left the villagers blinking, their eyes stung and wet. Smoke curled in threads above the square, but the choking mist was gone. The linden stood trembling, its branches heavy with dew that glittered like tears, but no longer thrashing. At its roots lay the shape of the guardian. No longer a towering figure of fire and shadow, it seemed small now. Broken branches arranged like limbs, veins of silver hardened into delicate filigree that gleamed faintly in the moonlight. Its chest, once a cavern of hunger, glowed with a soft ember, beating slow, faint, but alive. Marta leaned on Joran as they rose. Her breath came ragged, but her eyes stayed fixed on the figure. The villagers gathered in a cautious circle, their voices hushed, as if afraid a whisper too loud might rouse either miracle or ruin. "It listens again," Marta said softly. "Do you feel it?" Joran frowned, then nodded. The earth beneath them was quiet now, no thrashing roots, no venomous pulse. Only stillness, as if the soil itself had exhaled. A farmer stepped forward, his hands rough and shaking. He bowed his head, almost clumsily, before the broken figure. "We forgot you," he muttered. "We left you alone in silence. Forgive us." The words caught in the air, heavy and raw. One by one, others followed, whispers of regret, apologies murmured through tears, promises to remember. Mothers pressed their children forward to speak, elders bent stiffly to kneel, and for the first time in years, voices offered themselves not in fear but in reverence. The guardian stirred. Its eyes, no longer fire but pools of silver water, opened and swept across the circle. It did not speak. Instead, a ripple passed through the linden's leaves, a sound like wind though the night was still. Marta felt it against her skin, the gentlest acknowledgment. A forgiveness not fully given, but offered like the first crack of dawn. Joran whispered, "It's not gone. It's waiting." Marta nodded. She knew what he meant. The guardian was not destroyed, nor fully healed. It lingered between, needing them as much as they needed it. Their memory, their offerings, their voices were its lifeblood. Without them, silence would come again. She looked at the villagers, their faces illuminated in the faint glow. "Do you understand now?" she asked. "It is not enough to fear. You must remember. You must give. Not once, not only in terror, but always." The square held its breath. The people, weary and shaken, lowered their heads in solemn agreement. Above them, the linden shivered, and its leaves whispered like a sigh. In the days that followed, the village seemed quieter than it ever had before. Not empty. Life still spilled from doorways, goats still bleated from pens, children still darted through the alleys. But quieter in the way of people who had seen the edge of something vast and were still learning how to walk again without trembling. The linden at the square became a constant gathering place. No longer did anyone dare pass it without pausing. Some laid small offerings at its roots, handfuls of flour, fresh milk, a child's carved toy. Others touched its bark with open palms, whispering words no one else could hear. At dusk, Marta led the first new ritual. It was nothing grand, no iron bells or gilded shrines. Only a circle of villagers holding candles, their flames trembling in the breeze. Marta's voice was low as she began. "We remember the heart that listens." The villagers echoed her, voices unsteady at first, then growing into something firm. Children repeated the words like a song, their high tones carrying across the square. The guardian did not rise, but a shimmer stirred in the leaves, and the silver eyes half buried at the tree's roots blinked once, soft as a nod. Joran watched in awe, his face bathed in candlelight. He had become Marta's shadow since that night, following her with questions, with a hunger not unlike the guardian's, but his hunger was for understanding. Sometimes Marta answered, other times she only smiled, as if to say some knowledge must be earned through silence. One evening he asked her, Will it ever be whole again? Marta rested her hand on the tree's trunk. The bark was warm beneath her palm. Wholeness is not what we should ask for, she said. It remembers. It forgives. That is enough. Wholeness belongs to dreams. And yet, when the wind passed through the square, carrying with it a murmur that felt like laughter, Joran wondered if dreams were so far away after all. In time, the rituals grew richer. Not with gold or carved stone, but with stories. Each season, the people gathered to tell aloud the names of the lost, parents, children, lovers, even animals. Each name was a thread cast into the air, and the linden's branches seemed to hold them, weaving them into something unseen. The guardian's presence lingered, quieter now, no longer bursting with grief but humming like an undercurrent. The villagers lived with it, not apart from it, and in doing so they remembered. The square no longer felt like a place of dread, but like the center of a promise, that the silence would never come again. Winter pressed its pale hand over the village. Snow drifted against the cottages, softening their edges, muting every sound but the crack of firewood and the whistle of wind through shutters. Yet the linden stood evergreen, its roots coiled in warmth that no frost could touch. Its branches, though bare, gleamed faintly under the moon, as though the guardian's breath still lingered among them. Marta, however, grew thin. The winter seemed to drink from her more greedily than from others. She still walked to the square each evening, her cane biting into the frozen earth, but her steps grew shorter, her pauses longer. Joran was always near her side, eyes flicking between her and the tree, as if willing strength to pass from one into the other. One night, after the ritual of names was spoken, Marta lingered behind while the others filed away into the warm dark of their homes. Joran stayed too, pulling his cloak tighter, his breath a pale cloud in the air. "You know, boy," Marta said at last, voice hushed. "When I was younger, I thought I would live long enough to see the linden flower again. But trees and people keep different calendars. You'll see it," Joran replied quickly. "You'll stand here in spring and you'll—" Marta cut him off with a soft chuckle. "Hush. It is not a sorrowful thing. Everything has its season. Even guardians. Even keepers." She pressed her hand against the bark, her fingers trembling. "This old heart will need a younger voice. Someone to remind it when silence presses in again." Joran's throat tightened. "Me? Who else?" Marta's eyes glimmered, catching a hint of the linden's glow. "You heard it when no one else did. You sang when others choked on fear. The tree remembers courage as much as prayer." He swallowed, but the words came out ragged. "I'm not ready." "Neither was I," Marta said simply. She leaned her forehead against the trunk, breathing as if drawing strength from it. "But the tree does not wait for readiness. It waits for truth." Snow began to fall again, thin flakes catching in Joran's hair. He looked at Marta, smaller now, fragile in the candlelight, and felt a swell of both fear and tenderness. "Then I'll stay," he whispered. "As long as it needs me." The linden groaned softly in the wind, a sound that was almost approval. And for the first time since that terrible night, Joran felt not like a child, but like a thread in something vast and unbroken. The thaw came late that year. Snow clung stubbornly to the fields, turning to slush only when the first lambs bleated in the barns. The linden, however, stirred earlier than memory allowed. Tiny buds swelled along its branches, pale and timid as if unsure whether to trust the season. People whispered that the guardian was guiding spring back with a gentler hand. But Marta did not see the buds. She had taken to her bed, her breath shallow, her hands cool as river stones. The villagers came in twos and threes, leaving baskets of broth and herbs, though she scarcely touched them. Joran sat by her side, holding her wrist when sleep threatened to carry her too far. He was afraid that if he looked away, she might vanish like smoke. One evening, as the sky blushed with the last streaks of sunset, Marta's eyes fluttered open. She found Joran's hand and gave it the faintest squeeze. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. Joran bent close. "What?" "The linden," Marta said, her lips curving. "It is humming. A low, steady hum, like it is waiting." Joran's heart ached. He wanted to tell her no, to deny it, but as he held his breath, he felt it too, a subtle vibration in the air, like the memory of a song rather than the song itself. Marta's eyes softened. "Good, then it will not be alone." That night, while the stars watched with a quiet indifference, Marta slipped away. Her hand went slack in Joran's, and though her chest stilled, the hum of the linden grew clearer, as if it had received her spirit and drawn it into its roots. The funeral was simple, as Marta would have wanted. The villagers gathered beneath the linden, scattering herbs and ash at its base. Their voices rose in the familiar song, trembling but unbroken. Joran stood among them, pale and hollow-eyed, but when the final note faded, all eyes turned to him. It was not a demand spoken aloud. It was an understanding, silent, heavy, and undeniable. Marta had been the keeper. Now the boy who had sung with her on the night of terror must stand where she had stood. That evening, Joran carried a single candle to the square. He set it at the foot of the linden, as Marta had taught, and pressed his palm against the bark. "I'm here," he whispered. His voice quavered, but he did not step back. "I'll keep the song. I'll keep you." The tree shivered in the night wind, and though it did not speak, Joran felt its answer in the marrow of his bones. He was no longer merely the boy who listened, he was the voice entrusted to remind the village, and the guardian, that silence must never rule again. The first true spring day broke with warmth like a hand placed gently on the earth. The snow was gone, the soil dark and wet, and a mist clung low over the valley as though reluctant to lift the veil between seasons. Joran rose before dawn. He carried no candle this time, no herbs, no offerings but his own breath. The linden stood waiting, its branches heavy with buds that seemed to tremble on the edge of bursting. He pressed his palm against the bark, closing his eyes. The hum was there, steady and sure, but quieter now, as though listening for him. He inhaled, the chill of dawn filling his chest, and began to sing. The first note wavered. He thought of Marta, her cracked voice, her courage, and steadied himself. He thought of his father, his mother, the villagers who had stood their ground in fear and faith. The song swelled. This time, it was not a plea. It was not desperation. It was a promise. The linden answered. Its buds cracked open, one by one, until the branches were heavy with pale blossoms, luminous in the morning light. Their scent filled the square, sweet and sharp, and people stirred in their homes, stepping outside to witness what they had not seen in generations. The blossoms glowed faintly, not with fire, but with the gentler radiance of dawn. And beneath their glow, the guardian's presence lingered, not as a looming shape of sorrow, but as a quiet warmth in the air, a whisper at the edge of hearing. Not gone, not forgotten, simply at peace. The villagers gathered without being summoned. Some knelt, some touched the earth, others simply stood with tears in their eyes. They had lost, but they had also gained, a bond renewed, a promise made whole. Joran lowered his voice to a hum, letting the last note fade into the morning. His throat ached, but he felt lighter, as though the weight that had pressed on his chest since that terrible night had been lifted. "Are you with me?" he whispered. The blossoms shivered. A petal drifted down, landing on his shoulder, delicate as breath. He smiled through his tears. The linden stood radiant, a testament that the bond between the living and the unseen was not broken but reborn. And Joran knew, with a certainty that reached deeper than fear, that he was not merely a boy anymore. He was the song. He was the keeper. He was the reminder that sorrow, when tended, could blossom into strength. And so the legend lived on, not as a tale of warning, but as a promise of renewal.